but let's begin. Well, that just happened. Okay guys, so it's finally time to give you guys what you were really wanting to see, and that is the cast distance comparison between the JDM SLX DC and the American SLX DC. So I've got both of the reels mounted on the exact same rod, 6'8" Shimano Convergence medium heavy, fast action, 1/4 ounce to 3/4 ounce, 12-pound mono on both. Spool tension settings are exactly the same to just minimize the side-to-side play. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cast around the Lucky Craft Gunfish, the bigger one, I believe it's the 95, and let you guys see if you can see any kind of visual distance differences between the two. Now, I've been casting the American version off camera for a few minutes, letting the line settle, and let me tell you, I'm pretty surprised at what I saw. And the first thing I want to tell you is that for some reason now, the number 3 fluorocarbon mode on the American SLX DC seems to be able to handle this 12-pound mono with no problem. Now, I distinctly remember in the past, whenever you tried to cast monofilament with the fluorocarbon mode in both the SLX DC and CURADO DC, it seemed to blow up pretty much all the time. So I'm not sure why it's all of a sudden being able to handle monofilament mode. Maybe it's the fact that we have pretty much near perfect conditions, hardly any wind. But yeah, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go brake setting by brake setting and compare each number against the other. So meaning the number 4 on the JDM version versus number 4 on the American version, and just keep on going down and show you guys the results. Okay, so up first is going to be the American version SLX DC. Brake setting is number 4, and I am going to do about 5 casts a piece in each brake setting, and that should give us enough casts to see if there's any kind of distance difference between the two reels. But let's begin. Well, that just happened. On my backswing, the lure caught the line and it dunked the JDM version SLX DC in the water. So that is a pretty good waterproof test, I would say. And we're gonna see if it affected the JDM version. But let's get on with the American version test. It's 5. Okay, so now we have the JDM reel on setting number 4. Yep, setting number 4. I've dried it off and wiped off all the mud and whatever, and I'm pretty sure it'll be fine because the brake unit looks like it was sealed just like the American version. So here we go. It's 1. When I'm cranking this lure back in, I can definitely feel the water being expelled out of the insides. Oh well. Here we go, cast number 2. Shit, that went out there. Okay guys, so it looks like, in my opinion, the JDM version was definitely outcasting the American version in brake setting number 4 for both reels, probably by an average of at least 8 to 10 feet and maybe even 12 to 15 foot on some of those casts. Now that's just my opinion visually. Maybe you guys saw something different. I know it's kind of hard to judge with the perspective of the chest mounted GoPro, but from what I saw on brake setting 4, the JDM version is definitely the winner, and the spool definitely felt faster and freer flowing for the JDM version. Now let's go to brake setting number 3 and see what's what. All right, so brake setting number 3 for the American SLX DC. Now remember, this is supposed to be for fluorocarbon lines only, but for some reason it seems to be able to cast monofilament today, so let's see what happens. Damn, that went out there probably close to 60 yards. And of course, we got perfect conditions, maybe a couple of loops on the line that worked itself out towards the end. And let's do another. That one was a little bit shorter, but hopefully you guys saw that there was some overrun there in the middle, and luckily these casts are long enough for the brake system to sort it out. All right, JDM SLX DC. Switch the dial to number 3. Yep, it's on 3. Okay guys, so in number 3 mode, looks to me like the American version on a couple of casts was definitely casting longer, while the Japanese version looks like it was casting more consistently the same distance. But I'm going to give the win to the American version in brake setting number 3, because a couple of those casts looks like they were approaching 60 yards, while the American version looked like it was averaging probably like 50 yards on all the casts. Now I will say this, that after the reel got dunked in the water for a few seconds, the JDM version looks like it is making some kind of an extra noise during the cast. Now I don't hear any kind of grinding or anything when I'm reeling the lure in, so I don't think any kind of dirt or sand got in between, but maybe the bearings got affected. I'm definitely going to have to check that out once I get home. So now it's time to go down to the number 2 brake setting. Okay guys, so it's time for the number 2 setting for the American SLX DC, and that means it's in the braid and monofilament mode, and let's see what happens. Damn, that was the longest cast yet, probably at least 60 yards there. Okay guys, so it's the JDM reel's turn with the brake setting on 2. And let's see what's what. Okay, so for the number 2 brake mode, in my opinion, by virtue of that super long cast that the American version reel made, I'm gonna say it's the winner. And even with the regular, I guess, shorter cast that the American reel made, it was pretty much equaling or bettering the JDM version on brake setting number 2. So let's go down to brake setting number 1 and see what happens. All right guys, so I turned the brakes down to the number 1 setting for the American reel, and this is the extreme distance mode that gives the minimum amount of braking, and I'm going to show you what happens. And that went out there at least 60 yards, but here's the caveat: I did thumb the spool probably through at least half of the cast, especially at the beginning. So there's really no way this reel could throw this lure completely thumb free in the number 1 brake setting, because I blew it up off camera several times. Yep, even my thumb couldn't save that one. Okay, so the wind is picking up and it's probably gonna explode again, but I'm gonna try to control this cast with my thumb. That one was not quite 60, probably more like 50 yards. But once again, feathering the spool with my thumb, and I was able to use brake setting number 1. So let's get to the JDM version. Okay, JDM version, brake setting to number 1, and let's see what's what. So that was probably close to 60 yards, but I didn't really need to thumb the spool. Okay guys, so I'm pretty sure everyone could see that the clear winner in the number 1 brake setting was the JDM version of the SLX DC. Now, not only was it casting a bit farther, but some casts there were virtually no overruns, and some casts there were overruns that cleared itself out just before the lure landed. Now with the American version, in order to cast this lure in the number 1 brake mode, I had to pretty much use a lot of thumb. Now you saw when I didn't use thumb, the spool virtually exploded. So the clear winner for the number 1 brake setting, as far as control and distance, in my opinion, is the JDM version. So let's go home and go over the rest of my thoughts.
Okay, so I'm back in home, and really the 2 main questions I had for these 2 reels was, number 1, did Shimano Japan really give the JDM version a different DC brake tune or program versus the American version? And then number 2, of course, is which reel is going to be the better caster? So let's go over my thoughts and observations after casting both of these reels side by side, back to back on the same day. So question number 1, did Shimano Japan give the JDM reel different or better brakes? And I'm gonna say yes and no. Now, I did notice a difference in 2 of the brake settings, most notably number 4, where the JDM reels seem to be less restrictive and seem to cast a little bit farther, and also number 1, where the JDM reels seem to actually have more braking than the American reel, making that brake mode a little bit more accessible versus the American version reel. Now, brake setting number 2 and 3, honestly, I didn't really see any difference between either of these reels when casting in those modes. So which one of these reels casts better or further from what I saw out there? So keep in mind, I only used one lure, and I also used only monofilament line. But let's break it down like this. Now, in the number 4 brake setting, the JDM reels seem to cast further noticeably, and the spools seem to be faster. In the number 2 and 3 brake setting, there were times where the American version was outcasting the JDM version, but overall, I think they were about the same. The differences could have been attributed to, a different cast stroke, the lure possibly tumbling through the air, or the wind picking up from cast to cast. Now, in the number 1 brake setting, I would say it's about even as well, but the advantage, in my opinion, would go to the JDM reel for being way more accessible, because with this particular lure I was casting, even though it does fly through the air very well, I don't think it was heavy enough to be able to access the number 1 brake setting on the American version without using heavy amounts of thumbing throughout the cast. While with the JDM version, there was some fluffing, but you can pretty much go cast free throughout the cast with only using your thumb at the very end to stop the spool when the lure hit the water. Now, as far as overall cast distance, no matter which brake mode for both reels, I'm gonna have to say they're about even. There were some casts where the US version reel seemed to just really bomb that lure out there, and there were some casts where the JDM version seemed to equal it. So overall, with that particular lure, I'm going to say they're pretty equal. Now, if I had upped the lure to, let's say, a 1/2 ounce or 5/8 ounce top water, I more than likely would have been able to access the number 1 brake setting on the American version a little bit better and use less thumb. But would it have casted farther than the JDM version? Honestly, I don't know. So just based on this comparison, if you are looking for, overall casting distance, there's really not going to be any advantage in going with the JDM version, in my opinion, unless you're just going to stick to brake setting number 4, where the JDM version was the clear winner. Alright, so let's go over some thoughts and observations that I had out there. As you can see, I had a little accident where the JDM reel got dunked in the water for a few seconds, and the DC brakes were fine. The reel did develop some kind of extra little noise during the cast. Maybe water got in the bearings. So I did dry them out on the way home. I took the side plate off and let the spool bearings dry out, and I guess we're just gonna have to see whether that noise is still there the next time I take this reel out. And I do plan on doing several more videos on this reel, testing the different brake modes, etc., with different line. But as you can see, the DC unit is waterproof, just like the American version. Now, it seems to me that when it comes to lighter baits, the JDM version may have a slight advantage, and I'm talking 1/4 ounce and maybe a little bit less. You may get a little bit better and easier casting with the JDM model due to the slightly lighter spool. Now, also, the JDM version seems to have a more solid thumb bar. Now, the American version, I totally forgot about the mushy thumb bar that it had until I started casting it again. And you can definitely notice the mushy thumb bar on this reel versus the non-mushy thumb bar on this reel right here. So at least with these 2 particular reels that I have, the thumb bar tolerance on the JDM version seems to be better. So to wrap this video up, I'm going to not let you guys know which reel I think is better, because I think that I do need a little bit more time with the JDM reel first. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna take this out fishing, and I'm going to actually string it up with some fluorocarbon line to see how this reel handles fluorocarbon, because as I explained before, the brake modes on the JDM version don't seem to be associated with a particular line. And also, as I observed out on the water, the number 4 brake setting on the JDM reel seemed to be freer casting than the American version. So one question I thought was, will the JDM version reel be as forgiving in skipping than the American version, which if you saw that video that I did with the American reel and tested its skip mode, it is very, very forgiving for novice skippers. So I'm definitely going to be testing that out as well with this JDM version. Alright guys, so I hope this video answers at least most of the initial questions you may have had between what the differences are between both of these reels. And once again, I'm going to be putting the JDM version through several more tests before I give my overall verdict. But as far as it goes right now, I really don't see any advantage in one reel over the other overall when it came to casting performance as far as distance goes. Alright guys, thanks a lot.